The threat was loud and menacing. The Americans would pay for hitting Iran's nuclear facilities. So Iran launched missiles at U.S. bases in Qatar. They didn't do much except maybe symbolically, and by day's end, the U.S. president boldly declared there was a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. So is it really over? Take a moment. What kind of position was Iran in before the supposed ceasefire? Alan Iyer is a top nuclear negotiator.
Unenviable, certainly. I mean, they're being attacked by Israel. They've been attacked by the United States. Even before that happened, their economy was doing very poorly.
In conventional military terms, Iran was never a match for the United States or Israel. But it's always had other retaliatory options it could still call on whenever it next feels provoked. Like closing the Strait of Hormuz by laying mines in it. That waterway is sometimes called the world's most important oil choke point. About 25% of the globe's oil that's moved by sea goes through that waterway, 20% of liquefied natural gas. So close that strait, block those shipments, and the price of just about everything will rise. Iran has threatened to do it before, but never has. Since most of Iran's oil goes to China, closing the strait might be a disaster economically, so Iran may always consider it too risky a move. Those wary that any promised ceasefire will hold will want to keep an eye on the fate of individual ships in the strait.
Ships don't waste any time in these waters because they're carefully watched by the Iranian Coast Guard.
Iran has a pattern dating back to the 80s of seizing ships there under various pretenses.
Passage through the Gulf is becoming more and more dangerous.
It seemed to be using them as leverage. It held a vessel in April of 2023 for a year. And what about Iran's most notorious proxies? Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and of course Hamas in Gaza. How useful would those Iranian proxies really be in a prolonged fight now?
I think by Iranian metrics, they don't really necessarily have strong allies. Israel has already done such significant damage to Iran's proxies in the region that although, for example, the Houthis might try something against Israel, I don't think significant retaliation can come from any or all of Iran's proxies. Hezbollah has already announced, by and large, that it's sitting this one out.
To hear this, the temptation might be to say Iran has largely been defanged. But this started with a worry about Iran developing a nuclear weapon, and the American B-2s and their bunker-busting bombs may not have entirely dissolved that threat.
I worry a lot that Iran will still be able to reconstitute its nuclear program. And ultimately, I think the risk that it could build a nuclear weapon is still very live despite the airstrikes.
James Acton is the co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for Peace.
Prior to the US airstrikes, the US intelligence community reportedly told the Trump administration that if the US hit Fordow, the Iranian enrichment plant, then Iran would likely make the decision to actually build nuclear weapons. I'm deeply worried that decision is correct.
How would that happen with strikes the Americans insist were effective?
It was an incredible and overwhelming success.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
I can say to the American people with great confidence that they are much further away from a nuclear program today than they were 24 hours ago.
Notice the important caveat in the vice president's remarks there, because being further away from a nuclear program is not the same thing as being incapable of having a nuclear program. The head of the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization announced a new enrichment facility the day before Israel's airstrikes. It's unclear if it was hit. And as for the sites that were affected, look at the satellite imagery from U.S. defense contractor Maxar, showing a series of trucks and vehicles near the entrance of the Fordow nuclear facility before the airstrikes. That matters because among the most crucial elements to making a nuclear weapon, quantities of highly enriched uranium are, Acton says, easy to move and hard to track.
The Iranian highly enriched uranium, which is in the form of uranium hexafluoride, is typically stored in cylinders that are roughly the same size and shape as scuba tanks. the oxygen tanks for scuba diving. I am pretty worried that the first time we're going to know where it is if it's used in a nuclear explosion, in a nuclear test explosion somewhere in a desert in Iran.
You cannot militarily, kinetically eliminate Iran's nuclear program because that primarily resides in the knowledge of the Iranian scientists and technicians who work for it. So you can always rebuild eventually.
So after the U.S. president declared a ceasefire between Israel and Iran is happening, could diplomacy be back on the table? Up until this evening, it seemed hard to imagine.
Iran has said it will not return to the table as long as it's being attacked by Israel. Israel has said that it has no intention that it's in the midst of military operations. The table's been blown up. So how can you return to it?
Red lines. There's always talk of red lines in a war. They are set, they are crossed, and they shift.
I actually think when we look back, we will say the 12-day war was an important reset moment for the entire region.
And now a region holds its breath.